In a single year in the United States, the first American pulse radar was demonstrated by the Naval Research Laboratory. FM, frequency modulation radio, was discovered by a former Signal Corps officer, Edwin Armstrong, and the U.S. Army designed a pulse radar system for aircraft detection. The year was 1936, but only 5 years later, when the United States was forced into war, there already existed a defensive radar network from the Panama Canal to the Aleutian Islands, naval radar to detect surface vessels and to direct gunfire automatically, ASV, air to surface vessel radar in carrier aircraft, FM radios for all tanks, and AI, air interception radar for army aircraft. Development in the field was exponential and continued to be so across the war years. Radio had been little used in the First World War. The static fronts relied on wire communications and the telephone, or used runners, flag signals, and carrier pigeons. The advent of armor and aircraft made imperative a new form of communication, since static telephone networks were of little use. The interwar development of civilian radio technology had an obvious military application. By the 1930s, military research establishments worldwide explored the possibility of using radio for battlefield communication on land and at sea, both to command the battlefront directly and to allow frontline units of infantry, artillery, and armor to communicate at a local level. Most armies initially remained attached to the idea of wire communications because they were more secure and the sound quality better, but air forces everywhere required radio because there was no other means of communicating between aircraft or between ground control and airborne planes. Shipboard radio for surface vessels and submarines became essential for operational communication between fleet units and with command centers. Nevertheless, radio had disadvantages that had to be overcome. Early sets were heavy and the aerials and antenna conspicuously long. AM amplitude modulation radios, standard in the 1930s, were subject to interference, frequency drift, and static noise. The range for battlefront radios was short, sometimes little more than a kilometer or so. In a moving vehicle, AM radio was almost impossible to use. On board ship, radio could suffer concussion effects from the power of the naval guns. In extreme temperatures, high humidity, or heavy rain, radios could become inoperable, or the delicate circuits might corrode. Radio communication was also insecure since it could easily be intercepted and exploited by the enemy unless the messages had previously been enciphered, or be subject to jamming by enemy signal troops. Using radio en clair made sense only in fast moving battles on the ground or in the air, where enemy message interception would make little difference. Most of these disadvantages were confronted during the war years as the need for radio became more urgent, but radio security and survivability were never fully resolved. The creation of armored forces in the second half of the 1930s went hand in hand with the search for better communication. German armed forces were the first to explore the prospect of using radio to control a battlefield from higher command down to small frontline units. In June 1932, a large scale army maneuver titled Funkübung radio exercise tested communication in an imagined scenario of a Czechoslovak invasion of Germany. The exercise proved to be the foundation of a sophisticated signals doctrine and practice in which radio was to play a crucial part. Experience gained in the Spanish Civil War by German forces sent to aid Franco confirmed that armored vehicles worked to best advantage when they were linked by radio. By 1938, each armored unit was coordinated by a Befehlspanzerwagen armored control vehicle, in which the unit commander, accompanied by a range of radio equipment, maintained control over his force and contact with tactical headquarters. By 1940, there were 244 control vehicles. By the invasion of the Soviet Union, 330, an innovation fundamental to the effective operation of armored formations. Standard two-way radio communication was installed in all German tanks and proved to be a decisive advantage in the invasion of France and the Low Countries in 1940, when four-fifths of French tanks had no radio. To control a force of French tanks sometimes involved an officer running from one tank to the next, shouting through the hatches to be heard. By contrast, each German armored division enjoyed a dedicated and well equipped battalion of signal troops to sustain radio contact across the force. Radio training was rigorous. All signals had to employ code names: lion, eagle, sparrow, hawk, and so on, and be kept as brief as possible, using phrases listed in a brevity table to avoid cluttering the airwaves and betraying position to the enemy. The high standard of German radio signaling remains an important explanation for the ability of the German army, even in retreat, to sustain its fighting power.